Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'd like to talk about something a little bit different today, which is jealousy among artists. I wrote a little article about this and published it on my website, dvspress.com, the other day, and it got a lot of response. A lot of people were sending me messages or talking about kind of similar experiences that they had had, and a lot of people felt that I was right on the money with this. This article really comes years after another article I wrote a long time ago called Your Friends Are Not Your Audience. And this is just kind of the next step of that, being a little bit more honest with things. There is a personal flaw that seems to be very, very highly expressed among artists. I'm speaking broadly in terms of artists because most of my experience is in music as far as having to deal with other artists, and very, very little in the other fields, including as an author, but I find this among writers as well. And I seem to see it a whole lot among visual artists, those who are painters and things like that. And the way that this flaw expresses itself is that whenever somebody has success, whether that's a large amount of success or it's just success relative to whatever group you happen to be involved in, like if it's a cohort of students at a university, there's one student who finds a lot of success, usually financial success, and then people start to act against that person. They talk behind their back. They'll sometimes talk to customers about how bad the person is. They will talk to each other about how the person who is successful isn't talented or isn't as talented as them, doesn't deserve whatever he's got, or is egotistical or anything like this. And I began to uncover this. This is many years ago at this point, almost 20 years ago. I began to notice this with some of my friends at the university where I was a music student. And they would perpetually say hateful things about other people in the department. And at first, when you're just kind of in a social atmosphere and interacting with people, you kind of go along with that and you start to say, oh yeah, well he sucks at this or that. And after a while I realized these people never say anything positive about other people. There's a couple of people that I hung out with that just never had anything good to say about anybody else. And at the same time, I also noticed that the people who were doing the most trash talking, never to anyone's face, by the way, the people who did the most of this kind of sniping and biting at people's heels, especially while they weren't around to defend themselves, they were the least productive people in the department and the least productive people that I knew. They never really did anything. If they practiced, then they never really performed what they were practicing. They never really came out with anything. They never were out performing or trying to make a career for themselves. They just spent their time sniping at people who had that success. And of course, as I had more success, I found that these people were going to do that to me. So I realized that whatever they're saying about somebody else, they're probably going to say about me, and they're just going to say what they said about that other person to that person, but with me as the subject. They're going to act with that kind of intense jealousy towards me. And going through several different groups and, different scenes, whether it was, say, the university music scene or the university art scene, or maybe it was, say, like the local rock scene, just an intense amount of jealousy among people, jealousy between artists, and it was always directed towards those who were successful. So as I became successful in different ways, I found myself rather lonely because my peer group, which really I had thought that they were my friends, these are the people who were in programs with me or people who were in the scene with me, while they're supportive when you're doing nothing, as soon as you rise above that a little bit, then all of a sudden you're persona non grata. And this happened multiple times. So it happened when I was a composition student, because I worked harder than everybody else at whatever I chose to focus on. I just did. I worked hard and I put out a lot of stuff. So I would come out with new pieces of music every single week. Other composition students would compose 1 to 2 pieces of music like a semester, and to me that was just completely unacceptable, because I looked at composers of yore and even modern composers, and they were putting out music all the time. They were never ceasing their composition. Even a rock musician who comes out with an album every year, every other year, is at least on average composing a song every month or every other month, not one every 6 months. It just seemed really pathetic to me, the low output that all these other students had. So I endeavored to be good at that, and I endeavored to put out lots of stuff. And some pieces were good, some weren't good, but I always tried to finish them, make them as good as they could be, and I got them performed. So every single concert had, the composition concerts, they always had my music on them, and I ran out of performers that would perform them. And eventually I became a performer, originally because I just couldn't find enough people to perform my compositions. And at that time, the entire academic atmosphere was, at least at the university I was at, but also other universities, where I used to go to different conferences and things, and this attitude was present at every campus I visited and every little clique that I happened to interact with. I noticed people just talking down about every other person, and it was always the people who had success. This person shouldn't be successful, blah, 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 I'm better than them. Just ridiculous envy. So anyway, I would always have something to do, but it's hard to get people to perform things at the quality of which I expect, at the level in which I need the piece to be performed. So I started composing for myself more than anybody else, which let me have even more productive output, and made even more people resent me. And so I eventually said, well, I'm just going to be a performer. And I remember a year where I decided, I'm not going to pussyfoot around just kind of learning guitar, a couple pieces a semester. And the same thing with, say, guitar majors. They learn like one piece a semester, which is just not acceptable if you're trying to actually put together a set of music and go out and play. I said, well, I'm going to learn an hour of music this year. And I talked to my teachers about it and set out to do it, and I did it. And I figured out, like, in order to do, learn a whole hour of music a year, I needed to learn a piece about every other week. And so every single week I would go in and grab a bunch of stuff out of the music library, and I would sit in a room and I'd sight read it. And whatever I liked, whatever was kind of working for me and I felt like I could get done quickly, well, I learned that piece. And not only did that, I took it to another level. So I decided, well, not only am I going to have a whole hour at the end of this year, I'm going to perform these pieces as I learn them. So once I learn a piece, I'm going to perform it. And so there'd be a student concert that was usually open to perform for other students at the university. I would do one every single week in some cases. So I started doing one every single week to build up my performance skills. And so every single week I was playing. Turns out that upset a lot of people because they thought somehow I was embarrassing them, or somehow I was trying to prove I was better than everybody else. Well, I kind of did prove I was better than everybody else, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was I had this hour of music I needed to get done so that I could go make money in this business. And I did that. Not only did I do that, but I came up with an extra hour. So I ended up having 2 hours and then like 3 hours of material that I could play. And I started playing gigs, and I started actually getting paid to play gigs. And that's when I really noticed this attitude of resentment towards anyone that was successful, because not only did a lot of people start to really dislike me around that time, but I also got people basically trying to guilt me into giving them jobs. So like, it's like, you're playing 3 nights a week over here. Well, how come you can't let us play one of those nights? And I'm like, because they don't want you to play there, or because they hired me to do that gig, not you. So I'm not going to pass gigs to people just because you don't have gigs. I need to have as many performances happening as possible because I want to make money doing this. I want this to be the thing that I do. So I had just massive amounts of that. Turns out that's actually kind of universal. I talked to other artists, visual artists, very, very common in universities or in various kinds of art scenes to have this constant sniping and ankle biting going on from people who are less successful than those who are successful. And as you get bigger and bigger, you can see it even more prominently. I think comic book art is a really, really good example. There seems to be just a constant attack on Rob Liefeld. And I think most of it is envious because Rob Liefeld has been very successful. He's a guy who created Cable and Deadpool, very successful artist in the 90s and continues to be successful. The main thing you can bank on with Rob Liefeld is that he's gonna sell books. And so people will make, multiple web pages dedicated to tearing down his art and how bad his art is and this and that. And I think all of it comes from a place really of envy, because as far as other artists go, they're like, why does Rob have all this success when I can draw better than he can? Well, the answer is because Rob does something that people like, and you don't have to worry too much about the fact that maybe you're technically better than Rob Liefeld or something like that. But Rob Liefeld has a style that was very present in the 90s and connected with a lot of people and still connects with people today and makes them want to buy his books. So rather than coming for that approach, like, why do people like Rob Liefeld's art? It's Rob Liefeld sucks and I don't understand why he's successful. And that's really where the ankle biting comes from. There's really constant ankle biting whenever you look at comics. And I think the ankle biting increases because comics are a kind of a withered scene. And if you're really into comics, and I'm not trying to upset you with this, but comic books used to be a really big medium. So back in the 80s, comic books were huge. I've made content on this. The market shrank starting really in the 1990s and has shrunk down to something to be very niche, very small group, to the point where you have some large portion of the consumer base is divided into two camps. Those who are rabid consumers, they're the fanboys. They're the people who buy every Captain America book no matter what and know everything about various Captain America, timelines and that kind of stuff. The people who are super fans. And then you have people who are interested in working in the medium. And so there's not a whole lot of normies involved. There's like kind of like the super geeks and then artists. And the artists are really the ones who are always trying to snipe, always being upset about something not meeting whatever quality standard they've invented, quality standard which they themselves probably don't meet. And if you shrink that back down, it gets even worse. So if you look at a group like, say, Comicsgate, if you look at Comicsgate as a movement, there's a significant portion of whoever is involved with Comicsgate that is in the business somehow. Either they are trying to crowdfund a comic and they're crowdfunding other people's comics, or they are making content about comics, say like on YouTube or on their website. They're somehow involved in the business and they aren't just a normal consumer, a person looking to buy a book. And as Comicsgate shrinks and as it kind of loses momentum, then it becomes even more concentrated, where everybody involved in it is an artist or a producer of the content on some level. And then you have nothing but backbiting and infighting. Comicsgate really has deteriorated into just a drama movement, and that's what's left. And this is like the example when you have a clique. I think this is an inevitable trait, a trait that pops up and becomes poisonous. Whenever you have a scene where the majority of people in it are either the geeks or the producers. Once the normies are not in the scene anymore, or the normies never enter the scene, you're going to get this perpetual drama and backbiting. I've seen it in small rock scenes, like punk scenes in towns, and metal scenes, and various kinds of music scenes that I've either interacted with or been a part of. Back in the music days, going back in time a little bit, I used to really try to support other people, and I talked about this in a piece I wrote called like Your Friends Are Not Your Audience, where I really went to other people's concerts trying to support them. And you go and you look at the concert and it's mostly other music students, right? It's not people who aren't involved in the scene. They're not consumers of the art. It's other artists are the consumers. So it's going to be natural for that to happen. But those people, of course, wouldn't come to any of my concerts. They never supported me. I got very, very little support from other artists, and I got and I gave out massive support to other artists, to the point where I would book them on shows with me to try to help them out. I did really lots of different things to help out everybody around me. I was very generous with my time, lending of equipment, even things like that, so that people could try to get work done. And it really just, none of it ever got returned or reciprocated to me. And I kind of realized my friends are not my audience. They are just other people. And that's the other reason why people come on. I made another video a long time ago called, basically, don't get an arts degree. You need to get an arts degree because you need to network with people. Those people you're networking with are not going to help you out. You only need to network with people who are at least as successful as you are. If they're not successful, then they're really not going to do anything for you. It's a bunch of unsuccessful people trying to drag you down. That's the way that it is in most of these universities. Classical guitar is a really good example too. The classical guitar is something that I quit doing years and years ago at this point. And there's a lot of reasons why I quit doing it. One of the big ones, besides like my hearing was going at that point, and also I'd been just very tired of playing the same music over and over again and just doing the same thing. I needed to do something different for my growth. The classical guitar scene in general is extremely toxic. Flamenco is more toxic because it's racist. There's a huge racist element in it against anyone that's not perceived as being Gitano, and most of the people trying to do that gatekeeping are not themselves gypsies or anything like that, by the way. They just decide that that's their identity somehow. They're not from Spain, for example. But anyway, they're like, oh yeah, only people with brown skin can do flamenco. It's like, flamenco's from Spain. I don't know if you knew this. But anyway, so classical guitar scenes are super toxic. If you go to a classical guitar recital, one of the things that I've noticed at most recitals is it's almost entirely made up of other guitarists. It's students at various levels of progression going to the concerts. And the more serious the student is, the more that they're trying to be that person on stage, the more that they just snipe at people. I remember sitting around with these other guitar students from a bunch of universities at this guitar festival, and all they did was talk about how bad Elliot Fisk was, right? And we saw this Elliot Fisk concert, and it was a great concert. He did a great job. They're like, did you hear that he was making his guitar buzz at this point? Now, none of these people they probably still can't. They couldn't remotely play like Elliot Fisk. They couldn't get up there and play a 2-hour concert like Elliot Fisk, and they surely couldn't play the difficult repertoire he played at his level. He really is a good player. But because he plays with such passion and he plays such different repertoire all the time, there's mistakes in his playing, right? There's buzzing. He doesn't really care about breaking the sound of his guitar, and a lot of times it's a very kind of visceral kind of playing. So that leaves you open to sniping. Now, normal people love that because they're like, and the people at the highest level were like crying at Elliot Fisk playing because it was so passionate and it was such a moving performance. But the students were there trying to take notes about every little thing that they could think of that they might be able to do better than Elliot Fisk. And I remember this conversation at this point, and I was like, I think you guys either watch a different concert than me or just don't know music enough. Like, the regular people loved this, and the people who think they're good and go up and play like robots, nobody cares about that. It sounds boring. It just there's nothing to it if you aren't able to do the expressive element of the music. But so classical guitar scenes tend to be highly toxic. And as the internet has taken off, of course, like when I was doing classical guitar, the internet and internet communities for this stuff, YouTube wasn't a thing then. It wasn't a big thing like it is now. It's gotten much worse because those things tend to amplify those sorts of attitudes. It's almost always somebody who has zero success, zero experience actually playing, trying to snipe at people who are better and more successful and have more attention than they do, whatever it's going to be. So generally speaking, the people who are most critical are the people least capable of actually going to that level. Kind of ping-ponging back to comics, I see people criticizing art in Marvel Comics as being bad or something. And then those people are artists and they put out a comic and their art is nowhere near the level required to be able to publish with the big two, Marvel or DC. So they're sniping art from a position of weakness. They're always sniping from a position of weakness, not strength. And this is one of the things about this intense negative criticism, is it comes usually from a place of weakness, not strength. If you are stronger than that other person and you are better than them, you really don't need to criticize them. There's really no point to doing it. There's no reason to try to tear somebody down because you are in a superior position to them. In fact, it's probably not very sporting to do so. Like I would never take a new author and like rip his book apart on my channel or something like that. I would never do that. I would never engage in that kind of criticism to try to tear someone down and make them bad. I wouldn't do that to successful artists really either, because I'm in a position where I can use my power against them. It's It's not very sporting. So a lot of this comes from a position of weakness and of inferiority, and that's the inferiority complex speaking. It's a lot of envy that comes out of that. So anyway, I thought I'd share some of those feelings that I see with that. Just a whole lot of jealousy that gets amplified in artistic communities. And I think it has a lot to do with just not enough people that aren't, just a feeling like there's too much competition in it. That if somebody is successful, that comes at my expense. People would not want me to be successful, as I gained success in the market, because they viewed, if I'm playing a performance over here, it's because it's one less performance they get to play. It's an opportunity they don't have. Not thinking that I went out and made that opportunity. I went out and advertisement services and got somebody to hire me to do something. It's just a completely toxic way of looking at things. So I've just seen it a lot. And if you want to know how do I avoid it in authors, and this is really bad in young adult. So young adult literature is really toxic, and I completely stay away from the scene. I don't deal with writer YouTube or author tube or any of that kind of stuff because of this kind of jealous backbiting that I see whenever I interact with it. But young adult seems to be the worst, where anytime somebody, it's just a bunch of people blogging about how awful everyone else is. Somebody gets an opportunity to publish a book, and then they are immediately on the chopping block, and they are going to be the target for all the attacks and for all the heel striking, if you will. So that one's really, really toxic. I've noticed that one as well. So let me know if there's any experiences you've had that are like this. What art scenes have you been involved with or been kind of touched against and seen this sort of envy really pop up and rear its very, very ugly head? How do I avoid the dramas? I just avoid the drama. I just talk about what's good. And I'm talking about drama and some things that I'm tangentially aware of now. That's not me trying to snipe on any individuals or say that somebody's bad. It's just something that I notice and something that you might notice too. So let me know what you think down below in the comments section. And don't forget, I do write books from time to time. Here's two of the newest ones. Eyes on the Wall, City of Silver. Eyes on the Wall is a horror book. A lot of people really like the ending, so give that one a read. It has a good surprise ending. City of Silver, this is what I like to call 3:10 to Yuma, but fantasy. So check this one out. Both of these are 99 cents for the ebooks on Amazon. So very inexpensive to read those. And they're about a 2-hour read, so you can read the book instead of watching another bad movie. So I'll see you next time.